It was supposed to be a lazy Saturday. You know, the kind where you let the chores pile up, watch the news without really watching, scroll mindlessly on your phone. I was half asleep on the couch, vaguely aware of the sunlight streaming through the blinds and the soft hum of life going on around me. My phone buzzed. I picked it up, barely looking as I swiped through a few notifications. Then I saw her. Or, at least, a woman who looked just like her. It was one of those people you may know suggestions. Usually, it's old classmates or someone from work who barely left an impression. But this profile picture, she had my wife's face, her smile, even that slight tilt of her head she always does in photos. But the name wasn't hers. It was someone called Jessica Lane. My wife's name is Anna. I squinted at the screen, trying to shake the haze of sleep from my mind. Maybe it was just a duplicate profile or some strange Facebook glitch. Or, honestly, it wouldn't have been the first time one of those fake accounts had stolen someone's photo. For a minute, I considered letting it go. I even started to scroll past it, but something kept tugging at me. So, I clicked. The first thing I noticed was her relationship status. Single. Not just single, but single. Big, bold, and staring back at me like it was mocking me. Every photo on her profile was her, alone, no wedding ring, no kids in sight. Just her, laughing, posing with captions like living for the moment and finally free. She had always been more of a private person on her real account, only posting once in a blue moon and rarely sharing anything personal. But this version of her? She was active, chatty, and oddly flirtatious. There was even a photo I'd never seen before, one of her in a dress she hadn't worn around me. It was tight, bright red, clinging to her in ways she would never let herself dress in public. Or so I thought. In the comments, a guy named Cody had left a heart emoji, to which she'd replied, "You're too much." I felt like I was seeing a side of her I'd never met before, a stranger hidden under layers of someone I thought I knew better than anyone. I tried to brush it off. Maybe this was some joke or some misguided attempt at feeling young and attractive again. We'd been married for almost a decade, after all. Maybe this was just her version of a midlife crisis. But the pit in my stomach said otherwise. I clicked over to her friends list, wondering if I'd recognize anyone. It was all men, dozens of them. Some had commented on her photos, while others had left hearts or kiss emojis. Each click felt like peeling back the skin on an old wound. And all the while, this feeling, half disbelief, half dread, settled like a heavy weight in my chest. The next hour was a blur. I went back and forth between disbelief and some irrational attempt at denial, convincing myself this was just an elaborate misunderstanding. But then I found her Instagram, another profile under the same Jessica Lane name, full of more photos that looked like they'd been taken when she was supposed to be out with her girlfriends or on a work trip. There she was, in places I'd never been told about, with faces I'd never met. Each scroll revealed more. A weekend trip, where she'd told me she was going out of town for work. A dinner out with friends, the same night she'd told me she was with her sister. Every photo and caption felt like a stab to the heart, as if each was telling me a truth I hadn't been willing to see. By the time I put my phone down, the room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I could hear her in the kitchen, humming some song while she made coffee, just like any other day. Just like nothing had happened. Like she was still my wife, my best friend, the woman I thought I'd be with forever. I walked to the doorway and watched her, her back turned, completely unaware. She looked so familiar, yet suddenly felt so far away. I wanted to ask her, demand an explanation right there. But my voice caught in my throat, my mouth too dry to form words. Instead, I just stood there, silent, feeling the gap between us grow wider with every passing second. She had no idea what I'd just seen, and for the first time, I realized I didn't know her at all. The days that followed were pure agony. I'd close my eyes at night, trying to find some peace, but all I could see was that profile, those pictures of her living a life I hadn't been a part of. Each image played like a slideshow in my head, tugging me deeper into a spiral of doubt and suspicion. During the day, I watched her closely, every glance at her phone, every little chuckle or smile. What had once felt normal, comforting even, now made me feel like an outsider in my own home. But how do you bring something like this up? There was no way to ask, "Hey, Do you have a secret life you're hiding online without sounding paranoid or worse, invasive? So, I decided to hold off, to watch and wait, to gather my thoughts. Maybe I'd find some reasonable explanation. Maybe she'd even confess on her own. On the surface, everything was fine. She was still the woman I knew, the mother to our kids, my partner in the day-to-day grind. But now every little detail felt like evidence. I noticed her phone was always face down on the table. She'd pull it closer when a text came in, and sometimes I'd catch her slipping off to the other room, saying she had to make a call or check something for work. A month ago, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. Now it felt like a neon sign, flashing betrayal in bright, blinding letters. One night, as she was brushing her teeth, I took my chance. I told myself it was a harmless check, that I was just looking for peace of mind. Her phone was on the nightstand, plugged in and charging. I picked it up, my pulse quickening as I entered the passcode I'd seen her type 100 times. It unlocked, and I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I went to her social media apps first. Her real account was clean. Nothing unusual, just the usual photos of our family, a few vacation shots, birthday wishes from friends. But I wanted to see her other profile, the one she'd created under the alias. I typed in the name, Jessica Lane, into the search bar. Nothing. It was gone, wiped clean. Not a trace of it anywhere. My heart started pounding. Had she somehow known I'd seen it? Or was this just her way of covering her tracks? I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Part of me had hoped I'd find it again, that I could confront her with hard proof instead of circling around this doubt and confusion. But she'd outsmarted me. Or maybe she'd just gotten tired of the game. Frustrated, I checked her messages next. There were some texts with friends, a few work emails. But as I scrolled, I noticed a name that stood out, Mark. She'd mentioned a Mark once or twice, a new hire at work who'd started in her department. She called him nice, a hard worker, the type who always went above and beyond. But these texts, they felt a little too friendly, too familiar. The tone was light, playful. There was even a joke about him stealing her away from the boredom of the office. I read each message, looking for something damning, but there was nothing explicit, nothing obvious. Just enough to make my stomach churn. A few smiley faces, some laughter, an occasional "we should catch up sometime" thrown in casually. I put the phone back, trying to steady my breathing as I slipped under the covers. She came in a few minutes later, smiling as she settled in beside me. "Long day?" she asked, as if nothing was amiss, as if we were still just us. I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral, my voice steady. But inside, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. Who was this woman who could laugh with me, talk to me, kiss me goodnight, while hiding this entire other life? Had I been that blind, that naive? I lay there, my mind racing. I was trapped, unable to confront her without real proof, yet haunted by the images and messages I'd uncovered. It was like being stuck in a nightmare, one where everything seemed normal, but you knew deep down that something was terribly wrong. That night, I decided I'd wait just a little longer. Maybe the answers would come to me if I was patient. Maybe she'd slip up, or maybe she'd get tired of hiding. But one thing was certain, whatever this was, it wasn't going away on its own. The cracks beneath the surface were growing, spreading wider every day. And I knew, sooner or later, everything was going to break. I wasn't sleeping much by then. Every night, I'd lie awake, my mind stuck in an endless loop of questions. Had she really hidden an entire part of her life from me? Was she capable of more than just flirting? I kept hoping for a slip-up, something that would give me clarity, but I was getting nothing. Finally, one night, after she'd drifted off beside me, I decided to take a drastic step. I downloaded Tinder. I felt ridiculous even considering this, but some part of me had to know if she'd taken things that far. The idea of finding her on there was sickening, yet it felt like my last option. If I was wrong, I'd delete it, pretend I'd never stooped this low. It took a few tries. I adjusted the search radius, made sure I set the age range to match hers. I felt pathetic scrolling through strangers, hoping I wouldn't find her. But then, like a twisted punchline to a cruel joke, I did. There she was. She hadn't even changed her appearance much. No wig, No big sunglasses, just a casual smile and a dress I'd never seen her wear before. Her profile said, Jessica Lane, 35, looking for new experiences. And there, in her bio, it said the words I had been dreading: single and ready for a fresh start. I felt a sick kind of vindication, a confirmation of my worst fears. But as I scrolled through her profile, dread overtook everything else. Her photos showed her at places I recognized: a few bars downtown, a friend's wedding from last summer where she'd gone solo because I couldn't get off work. Each photo was carefully curated, just enough to be alluring, but never obvious. This wasn't just a fleeting mistake. This was intentional. She had created this person, Jessica, to be someone else entirely. I kept scrolling, looking at the match list below her profile. That's where I saw her connections. She'd been chatting with people, real people, men who lived nearby, who left little heart emojis, fire symbols, messages saying, "Can't wait to meet up." I clicked on one of them, a guy named Tyler, and read the latest message. It was from her. "Last time was fun. Let's do it again soon." I put my phone down, the screen blurring as I tried to breathe, to process. The image of my wife sitting across from some guy at a bar, laughing, leaning in, exchanging smiles that were once meant for me. It was enough to make my hands shake. I felt like a stranger in my own life, like everything I'd known and loved had been some kind of elaborate play, a role she'd grown tired of. But then, beneath the horror, anger started to simmer. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was furious. I'd spent years building this life with her, sacrificing my own wants, my own needs, trusting her with everything. And this was what she'd been doing? Going behind my back, sneaking around like a teenager? It felt surreal, wrong in a way that words couldn't capture. Here I was, married to someone who, in all the years together, had convinced me I was her only one. And now I was just one in a line of many, just one version of her life while she explored others behind closed doors, hiding in the glow of her phone screen. But now, I had proof. If she denied it, I could show her. There'd be no escaping the truth this time, no half-truths or dismissals of innocent fun. This was more than that, so much more, and she would have to answer for it. I didn't confront her right away, though. I needed to decide how to do it. I wanted to understand her reaction, wanted to see if she would crumble, if she'd have the courage to finally tell me the truth. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, while she slept soundly next to me, blissfully unaware that her secrets were no longer safe. At that moment, I knew two things. One, this was going to change everything. And two, I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to forgive her. That night, lying beside the woman I'd trusted with everything, I felt a bitter clarity settle over me. There was no going back now. The illusion was shattered, and all that was left was the painful truth. The silence between us grew heavier with each passing day. I was a stranger in my own home, walking on eggshells, tiptoeing around this truth I was carrying like a bomb. She seemed oblivious, if anything, more carefree than ever. Each time she laughed or looked at her phone with that secretive smile, it felt like salt in the wound. I knew I couldn't keep quiet forever. The rage that had simmered beneath my hurt was starting to boil over. I'd catch myself staring at her, my mind running through a dozen different versions of the confrontation I'd been planning. I pictured the shock on her face, maybe even a flicker of shame. But mostly I wondered if she'd finally come clean. It was late, well past midnight, when I couldn't take it anymore. She'd been sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone. I watched from the kitchen doorway, seeing her lost in whatever it was she was reading. I took a breath, then another, feeling the anger bubbling up and threatening to spill over. This was it. No more games, no more doubts. It was time to hear the truth. "Anna," I said, my voice breaking the quiet. She looked up, surprised. I walked over, stopping a few feet from her, my heart hammering in my chest. She put her phone down, a small, amused smile playing on her lips. "What's up? Can't sleep?" "Not exactly," I said, feeling my voice shake. I forced myself to meet her gaze, letting the silence stretch just long enough that her expression shifted from casual to cautious. I saw the flicker of worry in her eyes, and for a brief moment, I almost felt a strange satisfaction. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone light but wary. I cleared my throat. "Do you know a woman named Jessica Lane?" Her face froze. It was subtle, just a quick blink, a tightening of her jaw. But it was there. She shook her head slowly, trying to play it off, but the unease was creeping into her voice. "No, why?" I gave her a long, hard look. "Really?" "Because I found a profile. Looks just like you. Same photos. Different name." I paused, watching as the color drained from her face. "Ring any bells?" She looked down, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her phone case. "It's just a profile I made. For fun," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Nothing serious." Fun. The word felt like poison on my tongue. This wasn't just some harmless game, Anna. I saw the messages. I saw what you said to those guys. I know you've been meeting up with them. Her eyes shot up, wide, and suddenly panicked. "Wait, no, you don't understand. It wasn't like that. She hesitated, grasping for words, anything to explain this away. "I just wanted to feel something different." "Something different?" I repeated, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. "So that's what this is about? You're bored, so you create a whole fake life, meeting strangers behind my back." Her face crumpled, but I couldn't tell if it was remorse or simply guilt at being caught. She rubbed her temples, looking exhausted. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never meant for it to go this far." "Then how far did you mean for it to go?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. "Because you've lied to me, to our kids, to everyone. Did you even think about what this would do to us?" Her eyes filled with tears, but for once, I didn't feel moved by them. She shook her head, words failing her. "I'm sorry," she said finally, barely above a whisper. "I was lonely, I guess. I felt like maybe I'd lost myself somewhere along the way." "So you decided to find yourself by tearing us apart?" My voice broke, all the anger giving way to the raw ache that had been there since I'd first found her profile. She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't have an excuse. I messed up." The silence that followed was crushing. I searched her face, desperate for some kind of answer, some sign that the woman I'd loved was still there beneath all these lies. But all I saw was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize anymore. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, letting the weight of it all settle in. Finally, I took a deep breath and stepped back. "I don't know where we go from here, Anna, but I can't keep pretending everything's fine." She nodded, her shoulders slumping as if a great weight had finally caught up with her. And as I turned to leave the room, I felt that same weight settle on me, pressing down on everything we'd built, everything we'd been. For the first time, I wondered if there was anything left to save. After that night, we fell into a strained, unbearable silence. Days turned into weeks, and though we shared the same space, it was as if we were living in separate worlds. I couldn't look at her without seeing everything she'd kept from me, every lie, every secret message. The distance between us felt like a chasm neither of us could cross. She tried to reach out at first. She'd ask simple questions about the kids, about dinner, about work. I'd answer in clipped responses, barely looking up. Sometimes she'd linger, hoping to bridge the silence. But my anger was a wall she couldn't break through. Eventually, she stopped trying. Every little detail I used to take for granted now felt like a betrayal. I'd watch her from the corner of my eye, catching her quick glances at her phone, the way she'd turn away when I entered the room, the way she stayed up later than usual. Each moment felt like a reminder of what she'd done, of the deception she'd woven into the fabric of our lives. I hated how paranoid I'd become, how every sound, every small change in her behavior fed my suspicion. But here's the thing, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. Part of me wanted to walk out, to slam the door and never look back. But then there were the kids, blissfully unaware, still running to both of us with stories from school, still begging for bedtime stories and weekend trips. They didn't know about the fracture splitting our family in two, and I couldn't bear to see their world shattered. I felt trapped, a prisoner of my own pain. My anger didn't fade. It just shifted, taking on a quiet, smoldering form. We stopped talking about Jessica or Tinder or her nights out. It was easier to ignore it, to pretend like it had all been a terrible dream. But the silence was suffocating, wrapping around us until there was nothing left but this dull ache, this wound we couldn't heal. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. She was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV, but her mind was somewhere else. I watched her, my frustration building. How could she sit there, acting like nothing had happened? Did she feel any of this at all? I felt the words bubbling up, spilling over before I could stop them. "Do you regret it?" I asked, my voice breaking the quiet like a slap. She looked up, startled, her face pale. "What? Do you regret what you did?" I repeated, my voice harsher than I intended. "Or are you just sorry you got caught?" She flinched, her gaze dropping to her hands. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place. "Guilt, maybe, or sadness." "I regret hurting you," she said softly. "I know I messed up. I know I ruined things. But I didn't think it would feel this empty." "Empty?" I repeated, anger flaring again. "You think it feels empty? Try being the one who trusted you, the one you lied to." She nodded, her shoulders sagging under the weight of it. "I can't take it back. I wish I could. I know I've lost something precious, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to make it right." The words were hollow, but I could tell she meant them. And yet, they did nothing to ease the pain. The damage was done, etched into every silent meal, every forced smile, every night spent lying next to each other with miles of distance between us. Days turned into a kind of ritualistic endurance. We became roommates, sharing the same space but never truly connecting. She'd cook dinner. I'd clean up. She'd ask me if I needed anything from the store, and I'd give her a list. It was mechanical, devoid of the warmth we once had. I found myself longing for the past, for the days when I believed in her without question, when we'd laugh and share stories, when just sitting next to her had been enough. But now, it was as if we were locked in a silent war, both too exhausted to fight, but too wounded to forgive. Neither of us made the move to bridge the gap. Every night, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we had ended up here. I was angry at her, furious even, but part of me was angry at myself too. Angry for not seeing the signs, for trusting so completely, for still caring despite everything. And each night, as the silence pressed down around us, I realized I was afraid. Afraid that this would be our new normal. Afraid that I might never be able to move past what she'd done. And most of all, afraid that even if I did, we'd never find our way back to the love we'd once shared. I thought I'd reached the peak of betrayal. I thought I'd seen the worst of it, that I could somehow weather the hurt, the doubt, the endless nights spent questioning everything. But then came Mark, the man I had unknowingly shared my wife with. And whatever fragile peace I'd managed to build in the aftermath of her confession shattered all over again. It happened on a Monday evening, one of those gray, rainy days that make everything feel heavier. She'd left her phone charging in the kitchen while she went to take a shower. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it, but I was drawn to it like a moth to a flame, that familiar pull of suspicion gnawing at me. Something in me needed to know more, like a sickness I couldn't shake. I told myself it was just a glance, just to make sure I wasn't missing anything crucial. I unlocked her phone and scrolled through her messages. That's when I saw his name pop up again, Mark. She'd mentioned him before, back when this whole nightmare began. He was a co-worker, someone she'd laughed about in passing, the new guy in her department who was, in her words, a little too friendly. But these messages were nothing like what she'd told me. They weren't casual, weren't the light, meaningless banter she'd made them out to be. I clicked into the thread, my stomach twisting as I scrolled back through their conversation. The messages were endless, going back months, right around the time I'd started noticing her little changes. Some were harmless enough, but there was a familiarity, an intimacy that made my skin crawl. Inside jokes, emojis, late-night conversations that stretched until the early hours of the morning. There was no question in my mind that she'd emotionally checked out of our marriage long before she'd created Jessica. Then I saw it. One message from about a month ago, sent in the middle of the night. "I can't wait until the next time we can be alone." The blood drained from my face. I felt like I'd been punched, like the air had been ripped from my lungs. I scrolled further, feeling sicker with each message, each inside reference to moments they'd shared, places they'd met up. She called them her escape. She'd shared things with him that she hadn't told me in years, her dreams, her frustrations, even little memories that were ours, pieces of our history she'd repackaged and given to him like they were nothing. The worst part was, this wasn't just lust or some superficial fling. She cared about him in ways she hadn't cared about me in a long time. I felt like the ground was falling out from under me. It was one thing to see her playing pretend on a dating app, to imagine her sneaking around, creating this Jessica persona. But this was real. Mark wasn't some anonymous stranger. He was a part of her daily life, someone she saw every day, someone she could sit across from at work and laugh with, all while coming home to me pretending that we were fine. I heard the water shut off in the bathroom, and my pulse quickened. I locked her phone and put it back on the counter, backing away as if it was something poisonous. My mind raced, every nerve on edge, every muscle tense with anger, hurt, and disbelief. She walked into the kitchen, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping. She saw me standing there, my face pale, hands clenched into fists, and her smile faltered. "Are you okay?" she asked, the innocence in her voice cutting through me like a blade. I wanted to scream, to lay everything bare right then and there. But something in me held back, a twisted sort of pride that didn't want to let her see just how broken I felt. Instead, I gave her a tight, bitter smile. "Yeah," I said, voice clipped. "Just a long day." She watched me carefully, but she didn't push. Instead, she shrugged and moved to grab her phone, glancing down at the screen to check her messages. I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes as she noticed Mark's name on the screen. A small, involuntary smile curved her lips, a smile she hadn't given me in years. I turned away, feeling bile rise in my throat. Every moment of our life together felt like a lie, a carefully constructed show. And now, even the smallest of her smiles, her happiness, was a reminder of her betrayal. That night, I lay awake in the dark, my mind spinning with thoughts of Mark, of the stolen moments they'd shared, the intimacy they'd built right under my nose. I couldn't look at her, couldn't touch her. She was right there beside me, close enough to reach, and yet I'd never felt so alone in my entire life. I realized that this wasn't just about Jessica or dating apps. This was deeper, something that had been growing between us for far too long, hidden in the shadows. And now that I'd seen it, I knew there was no going back. In the days after discovering Mark, I found myself in a strange, hollow kind of daze. It was as if I were watching my own life from outside myself, detached, numb, barely going through the motions. I'd look at her and feel nothing but this terrible, quiet rage simmering beneath the surface. But beneath the anger, there was something more painful, a gnawing self-doubt, a relentless whisper in my mind that kept asking, "How did you let it come to this?" I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror one morning, staring at my own reflection. I looked older, worn down like someone who'd aged 10 years overnight. My hair was messy, eyes red from another sleepless night, and I barely recognized the man staring back at me. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so blind, so trusting, while she drifted further and further away? I remembered all those nights when she'd stayed out late, saying she was at work or with friends. The times I'd seen her laughing at her phone, brushing off my questions with a casual, "Oh, just work stuff." I'd trusted her, taken her words at face value. Maybe I'd even wanted to believe her, because the alternative was too painful to consider. I thought back to the early years of our marriage, when we were young and broke but happy, when just sitting together in our tiny apartment felt like enough. We'd laugh about stupid things, dream about the life we'd build together, share every hope, every fear. I had given her everything I had, invested every part of myself into building this life with her. And now, that life felt like a hollow shell, as if it had always been built on lies. The anger that simmered inside me wasn't just at her, it was at myself. I hated how foolish I felt, how naive. How had I let her treat me like this, walk all over the trust we'd built, without ever seeing it? What kind of man had I become that I hadn't even seen her slipping away? I looked at my reflection, The lines of worry and fatigue etched into my face, and felt an overwhelming sense of shame. I'd spent so much time blaming her, focused on her lies, her betrayals, that I'd never really looked at myself. And in that moment, I knew that I had to take some responsibility too. Maybe I'd gotten too comfortable, taken her for granted. Maybe I'd stopped paying attention, assuming she'd always be there no matter what. It wasn't that her betrayal was my fault. That was on her, her choices, her deception. But maybe I'd left her alone in ways I hadn't realized, so focused on the daily grind, on work and bills and routine, that I'd stopped seeing her as the woman I'd once fought so hard to win. I leaned against the sink, gripping the edge tightly, and took a deep breath. The truth was, there was no easy answer, no simple fix for the mess we were in. I could confront her again, throw Mark's name at her like a grenade, and watch the fallout. I could rage and demand answers, let my hurt and anger tear us apart piece by piece. Or I could stop, take a step back, and figure out what I really wanted. Did I want to fix this? Was there even anything left worth saving? Or was it time to walk away? The questions were endless, overwhelming. But as I stood there, staring at the broken man in the mirror, I felt a small flicker of resolve. I couldn't let this define me, couldn't let her betrayal become the story of my life. If I was going to move forward, whether with or without her, it had to be on my terms, with a clear head and an honest heart. That day, I made a promise to myself. No more hiding, no more denial. I'd face the truth, whatever it looked like. Whether that meant confronting her, starting over, or simply finding a way to heal, I would do it for me. Because in the end, I couldn't control her actions, her choices, her secrets. But I could choose what I did next. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I knew that I was ready to take control of my own life again. In the days that followed, something in me shifted. I couldn't carry the weight of the secrets anymore, not hers and not mine. I needed clarity, answers, even if they would hurt. I needed to hear her say the words, to tell me the truth of what we'd become. One evening, after the kids were asleep and the house had settled into its usual quiet, I decided it was time. She was sitting in the living room, half watching a show, but I could tell her mind was elsewhere. Maybe, on some level, she knew this was coming. "Anna," I said, keeping my voice steady as I took a seat across from her. Her head snapped up, her expression guarded, wary. "We need to talk. Really talk." She nodded, her face pale, but she didn't say anything. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I'd kept bottled up pressing down on me. I need the truth. All of it. Not just pieces, not excuses. I know about Mark. I know about Jessica. And I'm done pretending like I don't. She swallowed, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were twisting nervously in her lap. She looked like she was bracing herself, like she knew this was it. No more hiding, no more half answers. I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was just lost, I guess." "Lost?" I repeated, struggling to keep the bitterness from my tone. "What does that even mean, Anna?" "You didn't just get lost. You created an entirely new life, an alias. You went behind my back, meeting other people, sharing things with Mark you never shared with me. So tell me, how did this happen?" She closed her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might shut down completely. But then she looked up, meeting my gaze with an honesty I hadn't seen in years. I don't know when it started. Maybe it was when we got so routine, when everything became about bills and schedules and just surviving. Somewhere along the way, I started feeling invisible. Her words hit me, but I stayed silent, letting her continue. "Jessica was an escape. I didn't mean for it to go anywhere. At first, it was just harmless flirting, talking to strangers who didn't know anything about my real life. They didn't know me as a wife or a mother. They just knew me as me. And then there was Mark." She looked down, guilt etched into every line of her face. With Mark, it was different. He wasn't a stranger. He saw me every day, asked about my life, made me feel wanted again. I didn't mean for it to go as far as it did. I kept telling myself it wasn't serious, that it didn't mean anything. But it did. I know that now. I felt a lump in my throat, the anger warring with a strange, hollow sadness. So, what was I then? Just part of the routine? No, she said, her voice breaking. I know that sounds like a lie after everything I've done, but you're my husband. You're the person I built my life with. I got selfish. I wanted to feel like I mattered again, like I was more than just someone's wife, someone's mother. The words stung. I'd always thought that being her husband, the father of her children, was something sacred we shared. But somewhere along the way, that had become her burden instead of her anchor. Did you ever plan to stop? I asked quietly, fearing the answer. She hesitated, and that silence told me everything. I don't know. I kept telling myself I would, but every time I thought about stopping, I felt empty, like I'd lose the one part of myself that was still alive. I looked at her, seeing her clearly for the first time since this all began, a flawed, deeply unhappy woman who'd been lost for so long she'd started tearing down everything we'd built just to feel something again. I'd given her my trust, my love, my loyalty, and she'd taken it all for granted. I don't know if we can fix this, Anna, I said, my voice raw, each word a struggle. I don't know if there's anything left between us to rebuild. She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. I know. I understand if you need to leave. If this is the end. For a long moment, we just sat there, the weight of her confession hanging between us like an open wound. Neither of us knew what to say, how to move forward, or if there even was a way forward. I felt shattered, yet strangely relieved, like I'd finally reached the end of a long, dark tunnel. The truth was out. Now it was up to me to decide if I could live with it, or if I needed to let her go. The decision didn't come in a moment of anger or some grand, dramatic realization. It came quietly, like a slow dawn creeping over the horizon. In the days that followed her confession, I felt myself distancing, withdrawing into a place where her words and apologies couldn't reach me. I wasn't ready to accept them. I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to. Each day, I'd go through the motions, helping with breakfast, taking the kids to school, answering emails at work. But all the while, a single, steady truth was beginning to settle into place. The life I'd worked so hard to build with her was gone. Whatever it had once been, whatever dreams we'd shared, felt irrevocably tainted, like a painting someone had slashed and left to fray. One evening, as I packed up a box of my things in the garage, I felt an odd sense of calm. I wasn't angry anymore, or even hurt. I was just done. There was no part of me that wanted to stay, to rebuild. And maybe that was the hardest part to accept, that after everything we'd been through, everything we'd once shared, I didn't want to fight for us anymore. When I went back inside, I found her in the kitchen, washing dishes. The air between us had grown so thick with unspoken words that even the sound of water running felt like it was pressing down on us. She looked up, and for a moment, I saw the old sadness in her eyes, the regret, the uncertainty, the fear that she was losing me. Anna, I said, my voice calm but final. I think it's time we talk about what's next. She dried her hands, her shoulders slumping as she turned to face me. Are you saying you want to leave? I looked down, taking a breath. I don't know how to stay, I said honestly. I can't pretend that we're okay, that we can just patch things up and move on. Too much has happened. She nodded, and I could see her eyes fill with tears. I understand, she whispered. I can't blame you. I don't even know how I let it get this far. There was a sadness in her words, a depth of remorse that I could see was genuine. But it didn't change anything. It didn't erase the nights she'd spent with Mark, or the way she'd crafted an entire other identity behind my back. Apologies, however sincere, couldn't rebuild what had already crumbled. We sat down together that night, our words careful, deliberate, as if we were tiptoeing through a minefield. We talked about logistics, how we'd tell the kids, how we'd manage the house, who would stay where. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in months, maybe years, but it was laced with a deep sorrow neither of us could escape. Later, as I packed a bag with the essentials I'd need for a few nights away, I felt the weight of it all settle onto my shoulders. I was leaving the home where we'd shared 1,000 small moments, where we'd built our life piece by piece, where our kids had taken their first steps. It felt like leaving a part of myself behind, like walking away from the dreams we'd once dared to believe in. When I was ready, I went back into the living room, where she was sitting alone on the couch, her eyes red and distant. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say, of how to end something that had once been everything. "I loved you, Anna," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I loved you with everything I had." She looked up at me, her face crumpling as she choked back a sob. "I know," she said. "And I loved you too. I never stopped loving you. I just lost my way." There was nothing left to say. With a final nod, I turned and walked toward the door, my footsteps heavy as I crossed the threshold and left our life behind. The night air was cold and sharp, stinging my face as I closed the door behind me. I stood there for a moment, staring up at the house that had once been my home, now just a shell of what it had been. As I walked to my car, a strange sense of peace settled over me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I'd find a way forward. I'd rebuild, piece by piece, even if it took time. And maybe, just maybe, I'd discover a new version of myself in the process. One who knew his own worth, who wouldn't settle for less than he deserved. I drove away, the house fading in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt the weight of her betrayal start to lift. I was free, and for now, that was enough. The first few weeks on my own were a strange blend of emptiness and possibility. My days were quieter, filled with new routines, a space that was only mine. I found a small apartment nearby, close enough to see the kids regularly, but far enough that I could truly let go, find a fresh start away from the house and memories I'd left behind. The silence was thick at first, a reminder of everything I'd lost, but slowly, I began to see it as a canvas, a chance to rebuild in ways I hadn't before. I kept myself busy unpacking, rearranging the furniture, finding small things to make the space feel like home. One evening, I found myself staring at a photo I'd brought along, an old family picture from a camping trip years ago, when things had still felt solid safe. I almost put it away, the pain too sharp, too close, but something in me wanted to keep it out. That life, that love, it had been real once. Even if it was gone, it had shaped me, and I didn't want to forget that. Reconnecting with myself was a slow process. I'd spent so many years as someone's husband, as a father, that I'd forgotten who I was outside of those roles. There were moments I felt lost, unsure of who I was supposed to be without the familiar rhythms of married life, without the constant compromises and responsibilities that had once been second nature. But there was also a strange kind of freedom in it, a chance to explore parts of myself I'd buried over the years. One Saturday, I took the kids for a hike, just the three of us. The weather was perfect, the sun breaking through the trees in soft, golden light. We laughed, played, and for a few hours I felt like everything might actually be okay. Seeing their faces, hearing their laughter, it reminded me that they were my constant, my reason to keep moving forward. They were handling the separation better than I'd feared, and I knew I owed it to them to show up as the best version of myself. Back at the apartment that night, after the kids had gone home to Anna, I felt a strange sense of hope. The loneliness that had haunted me for weeks seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet contentment. I made a simple dinner, poured a glass of wine, and sat on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. For the first time, I felt a spark of something I hadn't in a long time: peace. In the months that followed, I focused on creating a new rhythm for myself. I started running again, taking long, meditative jogs at dawn, letting the miles help clear the fog that had clouded my mind. I picked up old hobbies, reading, cooking, even some light woodworking. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in ages, catching up over drinks, laughing about old memories. It was strange, rediscovering myself outside the boundaries of the life I'd built with Anna. But it was liberating, too, like reclaiming pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. Anna and I stayed civil, respectful for the kids' sake. She'd text me updates, small notes about their school projects, soccer games, funny things they'd said. We became co-parents instead of partners. Our conversations pared down to logistics and practicalities. There were no accusations, no bitterness, just the quiet understanding that we'd both moved on, each in our own way. Looking back, I could see that I'd grown through the pain, that every hurtful discovery, every sleepless night had brought me closer to this version of myself. Someone stronger, someone who valued honesty above comfort, who wouldn't settle for half-truths or hidden lies. I had found a resilience I didn't know I possessed, a strength I'd earned the hard way, through letting go. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset, I thought about forgiveness. Not for her, necessarily, but for myself. I'd spent so long blaming myself, feeling foolish, wondering what I could have done differently. But now, I could finally look back without bitterness. I could see that I'd done the best I could with the person I was then. And maybe that was enough. Starting again wasn't easy. It was painful, messy, full of moments when I didn't know if I'd ever feel whole. But now, as I sat alone, surrounded by this life I was slowly piecing back together, I realized I was no longer haunted by her choices or by my mistakes. I was free to rebuild, to move forward, and to make something new out of everything I'd learned. And for the first time, I felt ready.